You might have some idea what I'm going to talk about from that.
Well, I'd read the little bit you've written.
Yeah.
The run-up. Yeah.
Well, that was just a screen grab of when I just put in his name into Google. There is an enormous amount about Ignatius Loyola.
Really?
But so this is initially about him and about the Jesuits and about how they've impacted on education. So now he was Spanish, Basque, from the Basque country, lived in a place called Loyola, where I think his family had a castle there. And he became founder of the Society of Jesus, now more generally known as the Jesuits. He's their first superior general in 1541. That image I actually got by putting into DALL-E, an image generator, his name, and asked it to do it in the form of an impressionist painting. And I think it's by far the nicest one of him I've come across. So I've used that one.
Yes, it says good. Nice.
It is actually very accurately how he looked as well. They got it very well. So it's my impressionist version of him. When he was young, or younger, wasn't that young, he got injured when he was 30. He was very much into the usual way of reprobates being transformed as they get older. He was into dancing, fencing, gambling, the pursuit of young ladies, and dueling. He was very keen on the military and driven by desire for fame. He patterned his life on the stories of El Cid. We've all seen the film. The Knights of Camelot, the Song of Roland, and other tales of romantic chivalry. Anyway, at this Battle of Pamplona in May 1521, he was severely injured. The French army had stormed the fortress of Pamplona. A cannonball ricocheted off a nearby wall and hit his right leg. He was sent back to his father's castle in Loyola, where in an era before anesthetics, he underwent several surgical operations to repair the leg, with his bones set and rebroken. In the end, the operations left his right leg shorter than the other. Right on Ignatius. I'm at one with him. My right leg is shorter as well. Perhaps I'm a reincarnation of him. Nell, yeah. And Nell put his hand
just
up.
Identifying with the cohort. Yeah. Right leg shorter.
We're all Jesuits in some way or another. Anyway, he went through several stages. This is a stained glass window. There are all sorts of tributes to Ignatius of Loyola, but this is one of him getting injured. As you can see, it's very accurate. It's right leg that's the injured one. But I just think stained glass windows are wonderful. So that's why I put that one in. For no other reason, really. He went through a period of, you won't be surprised about this, conversions and visions. And that's an artist's impression of his visions. This is while he was recovering his surgery. In his convalescence, he asked for the romances of chivalry, his favourite reading, but there were none around. So instead, his beloved sister-in-law, Magdalena de Aroz, brought in the lives of Christ and the saints, and he began dreaming about imitating the saints in his readings. He was called at that time not Ignatius, but Inigo, which was his original name. He changed his name to Ignatius because it thought it was people from different countries would be more familiar with Ignatius than with Inigo. But he resolved to begin a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, to kiss the earth where our Lord had walked, and to do stricter penances. So he became a bit of an ascetic at that point. So his pilgrimage started off, he always seemed to choose very nice places to go to. Well, it looks wonderful, doesn't it? It's in Catalonia. I don't know whether anybody's been to Montserrat, but oh, of course, Graham has.
Yes, it's very remote actually. You have to take a cable car to get to it, or crampons, because it's on top of a rock. It's an amazing place. It's I think it's called the Black Madonna.
That's right, the one on the left, yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of, in the middle of nowhere. You can imagine in those days getting to it must have been incredibly difficult, but the views are splendid, but it's very, very isolated. That's all I can say. And of course, the biggest thing there now is the shop.
They've got to survive, haven't they?
Oh yeah, indeed, yeah. But kind of like the shop is absolutely massive,
Wow.
But the actual monastery is really worth a visit. Actually, it's an amazing place.
He did walk to it, and he walked to other places, so his leg must have healed pretty well for him to do that. I wouldn't have been able to do that walk.
Yeah, but I think it's a kind of walk that would take you, a couple of days, and you probably need some rest on the way. But
anyway, when he got there to the Benedictine monastery, he carefully examined his past sins. That must have taken him a while. Gave his fine clothes to the poor he met, wore a garment of sackcloth, then hung his sword and dagger at the Virgin's altar during an overnight vigil at the shrine. It's all very well documented, this, obviously by the Jesuits. So he also then went at another nice place, Manresa in Catalonia. He walked on to the nearby town of Manresa, which is also in Catalonia, where he lived for about a year, begging for his keep and eventually doing chores at a local hospital in exchange for food and lodging. He spent several months praying in a cave nearby, praying for. He practiced rigorous asceticism, praying for 7 hours a day and formulating the fundamentals of his spiritual exercise. So there, it actually looks quite well upholstered, but presumably that's because people go there and sit in it and contemplate. I don't imagine it looked like that at the time. But as I say,
sorry to be a bit dim. What does asceticism mean?
Asceticism, it means somebody who eats very plain food and wears very plain garments and generally has a life of living on the minimum. I think that's my way of doing it. And also maybe beating themselves and wearing hair shirts and things like that. Depends how far you take it. And anyway, in 1523, he made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. I presume he didn't walk there. He didn't stay there very long. He made a pilgrimage with the aim of settling there, but he remained there for only 2 weeks. But he was sent back to Europe by the Franciscans, who must have got a bit fed up with him. I don't know why. But he went all that way, only stayed for like the equivalent of a modern day holiday by EasyJet, and then sent back again. He traveled quite a lot in his life. He moved to France to study at the University of Paris. On the morning of the 15th of August, 1534, when he was there in the chapel of the Church of St. Peter at the Montmartre. Anybody been there, Graham? No? Oh, but Bill's been there, have you?
Yeah, I used to live about 2 streets away from Montmartre, and it's a lovely place.
On the morning of this day in August 1534, in this chapel, Loyola and 6 of his companions, only one of whom was a priest, took upon themselves the solemn vows of their lifelong work. And in 1539, he formed the Society of Jesus, later approved by Pope Paul III, who was chosen as the first superior general of the order. Apparently, Paris at that time was in the middle of anti-Protestant turmoil, which had forced John Calvin to flee France for Switzerland, I think. He founded it with 2 of them, one of whom was Francis Xavier. I imagine also became a saint at some time. He was able to open up a school, a college in Messina in Sicily. It was so successful that its rules and methods were later used in subsequent colleges. He used the Latin phrase, ite inflammate omnia, meaning go set the world on fire, which is a rather kind of dangerous slogan given the present state of fires in the world, isn't it? It's a phrase that's used in the Jesuit order to this day, set the world on fire. He also set up the Jesuit Constitution, which called for the centralized organization, absolute self-denial and obedience to the Pope and to superiors in the church hierarchy, and to be, as we all know, motto perendi ac cadaver, as if a dead body. Now, that might seem to you a rather strange thing to be saying. It meant that a Jesuit should be as emptied of ego as a corpse. you can see they're hardline, these Jesuits, and I was taught by them, and they certainly had an impact on me. But I'll come on to that later if I've got time.
Bit like some of the elders, isn't it?
Ignatius was beatified by Pope Paul V and canonized by Pope Gregory XV. I'm sure you all know the difference between being beatified and canonized. In one, you become a blessed, and the other one, you become a saint. It's a bit like the early stages of becoming a saint. If you look at it, it took less than, 12 years or so for him to become canonized, which he obviously was short-tracked there. Where were all the miracles that were supposed to have occurred? I suppose his miracle was in turning around the Catholic Church to defend itself against the Reformation. Anyway, his feast day is celebrated annually on 31st of July, the day he died in 1609. The Jesuits were the shock troops of the papacy. And the Jesuits have long used education as a weapon in their struggle against Protestant heresy. Whilst the popes of the Renaissance tend to be corrupt humanists with very doubtful, dubious personal morals. And we're not above poisoning an inconvenient rival. But they weren't fanatics. If they defended the church with fanaticism against the reformers, it was, as Karl Kautsky, the German historian, aptly observed, a fanaticism of avarice masquerading as faith, which I think is a wonderful phrase. But anyway, the Jesuits have remained the arch strategists of militant Catholicism, though modern Catholicism itself, I read in a socialist interpretation of the Jesuits, which is very interesting, has become very defensive Catholicism, fighting for its existence against the mounting tide of secular tide of heresy. The Jesuits take these vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience and live together in a community. They live with other Jesuits.
Bernard?
Yes.
Karl Kautsky was a Marxist.
That's where I got the quote from then, yeah.
A leading social democrat, you know, so the equivalent to the Labour Party at that time regarded themselves as Marxists and, you know, some revolutionaries. And he, in fact, they sometimes called him the Marxist Pope.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
You know, so he was a major theoretician, right, in the German socialist movement.
Anyway, he got him into trouble with the Spanish Inquisition, and he was put in prison for 3 times for interrogation. Does everybody remember the Monty Python sketch where they're dressed up as the Spanish Inquisition? It's absolutely hilarious if you want to look at it. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, and somebody saying, what are you doing here? The Spanish Inquisition itself wasn't started up by the Jesuits. It was started long before the Jesuits by King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile to maintain Catholic orthodoxy. So it was under the control of the monarchy rather than the Catholic Church. And so it was very distrustful of the Jesuits in its early years, but later on, they became actively involved in the Inquisition and became inquisitors, finding and prosecuting heretics. They were seen as the most zealous and effective agents of the Inquisition, using their education and intelligence to interrogate suspects and root out heretical beliefs. So they were important figures in the Inquisition until its suppression in the early 19th century. I found in 2 people I've known an ability to beat me at any argument that I want to try. One was my father-in-law, who was in military intelligence in World War II and who used to interrogate high-ranking Nazis as Europe was being liberated. And his ability to do any argument meant that I gave up arguing with him because he always just tied me in knots. He was so good at it. The other one was actually my history teacher at school, who was also a Jesuit and later became Bishop of Salford. And he had the same ability to listen to any argument you put forward, not get upset or anything about them, couldn't be insulted, and yet turn it against you. It's just brilliant. So that was the Spanish Inquisition, Jesuits and education. And they believed in inculturation, finding points of connection between Christianity and local cultures. And they became leading Catholic figures in the sciences, arts, philosophy, and theology. Interestingly, they were suppressed, the Jesuits, by the papacy in the 18th century due to the external political and religious pressures that they were under, and they were seen as a potential threat. But then they got back into favor, and they run over 250 universities and engaging in scientific research and social justice causes. This is something I find very interesting. It's rules for discernment and the various elements of the AMDG, which is the Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, which you often see in that symbol on the left, the Jesuits' things. So just looking at them in turn, magis is a Latin for more, and is a hallmark of Jesuit education, challenging students to go beyond what is expected, interacting with the world with generosity, excellence and empathy, and modeled by personal accountability and high expectations of achievement. You can see why in some ways the Jesuit education has become a bit like these management courses you go on. The cura personalis you see on the bottom right there means care for the whole self in Latin, personal attention in the classroom, deep respect for diversity and difference, and an emphasis on holistic care for the mind, body, and spirit. Reflection was also one of their major elements as well. Students invited to pause, consider the world around them, and place within it before making decisions. Challenge the status quo, acknowledge biases, and accept responsibility for actions. And the final one there is Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, rendered is the Latin motto for the Society of Jesus. It stands for the greater glory of God. And there is that famous statement, isn't it? Give me a boy by the age of 7 and I'll have him for life, something like that, that the Jesuits are supposed to have coined. And the rules of discernment, which he developed in the 1500s, as a simplified summary: understanding your spiritual state, whether you recognize whether you're moving towards or away from a spirit state of grace, and understand the influences acting upon you. Identity, consolation, and desolation, accepting that there are periods of desolation characterized by anxiety, fear, and a turning towards earthly things. And you've got to act. Consolation is a state of peace, joy, and love for the divine, which you've got to work towards. So these can guide your spiritual journey. Don't make decisions in desolation. If you're feeling distant or cut off from the divine, state of desolation, it's not the best time to make decisions. Wait until you return to a state of consolation. Discern the spirits, understand whether your feelings are influenced by good or evil, moving away, moving closer towards or away from grace. And finally, seek guidance from the best navigated with the help of a spiritual director or guide. So you can see they're almost like a modern day approach to doing well at business or anything else. I just thought it was very interesting that it is formed on such strong principles, and why the Jesuits are such impressive individuals.
Like self-actualization, isn't it?
Yes, the Maslow and things. Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Very much like that, I think.
Yeah. I found out, incidentally, that Ignatius Loyola might have spent some time in London, possibly studying at St. Paul's Cathedral School, which is where they got the tablet from. However, details of his whereabouts and activities during that period are not known, though the Jesuits have claimed that he was. So there's very little information about whether he actually came. But he seemed to have traveled so much, so I don't think it was surprised if he did. Here is a timeline of the Jesuits from the Jesuit. The Jesuits have a very glossy magazine, which you can all look at. You can't really read that, so I tried to break it up into two. So you can see the start of the Jesuit mission to England in the 1580s. Then you got the martyrdom of people like Edmund Campion, who lived locally to Chorlton. He lived in Chorlton, in the Barlow Hall, which is now a golf club nearby. And he was one of the first Jesuit missionaries, and he got hanged or quartered as a Catholic preacher later on. So they were martyred together with Ogilvy and others. So they got the suppression of the Society of Jesus, and then in the late 18th century, the arrival of Jesuit teachers and pupils at Stonyhurst, which many of you are familiar with in Lancashire. And it was set up there, and that's when they got back. They restored the English province. Pope Francis, the Pope at the moment, is a Jesuit. He's the first Jesuit priest, I think. I'm not sure whether it's ever, but certainly for a long time. And I personally think, as popes go, he's been a good one. He's usually on the side of progressive attitudes very often. I'm not saying always by any means, but it's certainly worth looking at what he's actually said and done. And just to say that when I was 11, here's a Dali image of me, Bing image creator of me. I asked it to portray an 11-year boy on crutches with an audience with Pope John the 23rd. They got the crutches wrong, gave me a wheelchair instead. But I love his out. I love he's obviously got problems with his right leg there, the Pope, never mind. But I just thought it was amusing, that one. But I did. I went on a school pilgrimage to Rome and got an audience with Pope John the 23rd. There was emancipation of the Catholics in 1829, the restoration of the Jesuits. The Jesuit connection locally is quite a big one through the Holy Name and the Vaughan Brothers. It's an old recusant. You know the word recusant? It means Catholics who refused to become Protestants. They were known as recusants, and quite a lot managed to survive. After a while, as long as they laid low, they weren't hunted out. And he belonged to the Vaughans of Courtfield in Hertfordshire. 5 of the Vaughan daughters became nuns. 6 of the 8 sons received holy orders and became priests. So a pretty active family in the Catholic Church. His brother, Bernard Vaughan on the left, his brother became Bishop of Salford and later Archbishop of Westminster, a cardinal and primate, while he was Bishop of Salford, and he established Bede's College, which is where I went. And there's an image of me being taught by Jesuits that I dragged up from an image generator. Was Bishop Burke. Now, he was my history teacher at St. Bede's, and I thought he was a brilliant history teacher. And the reason for that was, first of all, he would accept any comment and any criticism, and was always looking for an argument. And he also said lots of phrases, one of which was, you will not remember any of the historical stuff that I've told you, but you will remember my asides. And that was entirely true, including remembering that aside.
Has the Holy Name got anything to do with the Jesuits?
Yes, run by Jesuits, established by Jesuits. By the Vaughans, which I came to. So that was segueing into the thing about Holy Name and the Hidden Gem and St. Augustine's and St. Bede's, all about the local effect of the Jesuits. But that's for another day.
Can I just add something to the beginning?
Yes, Maureen.
My right leg is shorter than the other, and I have a built-up shoe. So can I be part of the club? Please?
Wow, you're definitely in mine and Nell's club. Yes, join the club.
Thank you.
What is it about the right leg? Why not left legs? Anyway, there you go.
Don't know.
It's probably the Catholic influence keeping the left leg intact.
Left footers.
Left footers.
Catholics are left footers.
Left footers, there you go. It's a foot is attached to the leg, so we'll include that. Yeah, left footers, yeah. Why were they left footers? Who knows?
You mentioned Stonyhurst before. It's a very posh college, isn't it? It's a very posh school. £48,000 a year to go there, by the way.
£48,000. Wow.
Chris was singing at in the choir there yesterday at a wedding.
At Stonyhurst.
Yeah, and the bride and groom arrived in a helicopter and left in a helicopter to go to the reception in somewhere in Yorkshire. You have to be very rich.
But it's interesting that there seems to be a revival. Holy Name can get packed now.
Yeah.
So there is some sort of revival going on. I don't know.
That is good.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
it's always
interesting.
worth coming to.